Hey, Paulette, great to see you.
Oh, Evna, great to see you too. Thanks so much for having me as your guest.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to hear from you and from your stories today.
Well, I have a lot of them, so it will be my pleasure to share.
Wonderful. So for you guys who are watching this right now, Paulette is quite amazing. So first of all, I just want you to know that she is the author of an amazing book that I actually have been reading and acquired, which is Did You Say Something, Susan? How Any Woman Can Gain Confidence with Assertive Communication. And you guys know how passionate I am about assertive communication. And she wrote this really great book with lots of examples. So I highly recommend you guys to check it out. And she'll be sharing a little bit about that, of her stories in this book today as well. But she's also a PhD. She's a professor emeritus of speech and linguistics and communication. And she's really, she's been all over the place. She actually, if you guys don't know, I'm Brazilian, and she actually speaks a little bit of Portuguese, which is amazing, and Spanish, because she's been all over the world teaching and speaking in different, in communication related to it. So it's really amazing to have her here today. She's got so many accomplishments. Has been all over. Now, I would like to start asking, the first time I researched, I Googled you, there were all these little videos of you speaking, having this interesting conversation with Trump when he was president. And
Yes.
and it went viral. It went crazy. Got tweeted millions of times. And it was such an interesting experience. And it also shows a little bit of the element of assertiveness when there's this disagreement. Could you share a little bit about how that happened and what you were going through and thinking?
Sure. So I had been invited to be part of the Trump Miami town hall in October while the candidates were running for office and campaigning. And I was chosen to ask former President Trump my question about DACA, because immigration, I'm a passionate proponent of immigration, being the granddaughter of immigrants. I was very concerned that the former president was going to cut the Dreamers program. So that was my question for the town hall. I was the last person chosen to ask before the town hall completed. I was nervous. I was stressed. The atmosphere at the venue was very tense, somewhat acrimonious. So I'm called to the microphone to ask the president my question. And he looked at me, as he did all the other people asking questions, I must say, with this gracious 1,000,000,000,000,000-watt smile. And you never really see that former President Trump smile. It took me by surprise. So after I said, "Good evening, Mr. President," I hadn't prepared to say anything else other than to delve right into my question. And what popped out of my mouth was, "I gotta say, Mr. President, you have a great smile." And to my amazement, people started to applaud. And then what popped out of my mouth was, "You're so handsome when you smile." Okay. The next day, my son called me up to tell me, "Mom, you have gone viral. You have hundreds of thousands of tweets and comments and posts on social media. Do you realize that?" I had no idea. So the whole situation was extremely unexpected, and I'm very happy to have faded back into obscurity.
Wow, it's such an amazing story. How you became famous within like overnight with that situation.
And the bizarre thing is, or not bizarre, I was not a supporter of Mr. Trump. I did not vote for him. And people thought that was a weird juxtaposition. How could that be? Then that means your compliment couldn't have been sincere. Well, it was. And my message is, isn't it tragic that kindness has been lost? That we're expected to be unkind to those with whom we disagree. And my second part of the message is that being able to pay a sincere, genuine compliment to someone with whom you have philosophical or political differences should not be mutually exclusive. So that's my takeaway from all the hullabaloo.
I think that's a wonderful example because first, you were just so natural and so authentic in that moment. I think you mentioned in some of the articles that you had really only planned out that first sentence, and then everything just flowed naturally and you were in the moment, even though there were cameras and people and microphones, and you were dealing with the ultimate figure of authority, which is the President of the United States. And you were still just so relaxed and able to have that interaction. And the second point, which is even more important, which is that even though you were not a supporter, you were still able to be a nice, kind, positive person and compliment somebody, even though you disagree. So I think that is the ultimate example of assertiveness right there.
And that experience triggered me to add, when I was revising the book, I had originally written Did You Say Something, Susan, about 20 years ago. And many of the examples were out of date. Many of the resources and references were rather old. But the content isn't old. It's timeless. So as I was revising and modernizing and rewriting the book, I realized I should include a chapter on paying compliments, because what people don't realize is paying compliments is a highly assertive act. And too few of us do that for any number of reasons. We don't feel confident in ourselves. Therefore, maybe we feel that someone else won't appreciate our compliment, or why should they believe anything coming from us? But that's within our own minds. And paying compliments is a highly assertive way to express yourself and start to gain confidence as well, Ivna.
No, absolutely. And you actually have a story in your book where you talk about the opposite of that, which is receiving compliments. The first time that you learned that, your professor showed you the importance of receiving compliments well, because you weren't doing that before as a young student. So I'd love to hear that story.
Oh, thank you. That's a great story. I was a college student at Queens College in New York City. I had made a presentation in a psychology class in one of these large auditoriums with 400 students in a class. And the professor said to me, "That was an excellent presentation, Paulette." Miss Wainless, my maiden name. He was very formal. And I sort of mumbled and said, "Well, it wasn't as good as some of the others." And he yelled, "Stop, stop right there." And I thought, oh God, now what? And he said, "Do you realize what you just did?" And no, Dr. Reynolds, I really don't realize what I just did. He said, "I just paid you a compliment and you took it, threw it on the floor and stomped on it." And I said, "Oh." And he said, "Next time someone pays you a compliment, you look them in the eye, you smile, and you say, 'Thank you very much. I appreciate that.'"
That's that's a good moment, a good time, and a good way to learn that lesson.
That's right. So when we diminish someone's compliment, if someone compliments you and you respond, "Oh, you like my haircut? Oh, it makes my nose look too big." Or, "This dress? Oh, I think it makes me look fat." You're really diminishing the person's opinion. You're telling them they don't know what they're talking about. So when somebody pays you a compliment, accept it graciously. I know it's not always easy, but you can do it. Smile and say, "Thank you."
Yeah, I think it's just a question of gaining that habit. But once people shift their perspective from, "Oh, I'm not good, I don't deserve this," or whatever, to "This is a gift.
Yes.
And as such, like you write as well, this is a gift. And as a gift, I need to receive it as if they were giving me something physical. Like you're not going to say, oh, this is not, I don't deserve this. Don't give it to me. I mean,
Exactly.
you accept it graciously. So I love that.
I'm glad. And one of my favorite quotes of all time is Mark Twain's quote. He says, I can live on a good compliment for 2 weeks with nothing else to eat. So we increase someone's joy when we are assertive enough to show gratitude or to give praise or to pay a compliment. We elevate the other person's mood and attitude, and we also elevate our own by virtue of the fact we see how happy it's made someone else. So there's so many benefits to being assertive in this way.
Yeah, and I never heard somebody say this before, but you said assertive enough to show gratitude to somebody else, which is right. True. Like everybody talks about gratitude, but sometimes people are not because they're not assertive enough. And why did you? What inspired you to write the book, an assertiveness book for women?
Well, okay. I was on my way to breakfast one day with a good friend. And on our way there, she said to me, out of the clear blue sky, Paulette, why is it that people feel it's okay to put me down, to say inappropriate things to me, and to take advantage of me, and they don't do that to you? Well, my answer to my friend was immediate. I said, Ellen, that's because you let them. People will treat you the way you teach them to treat you. So my friend said to me, well, could you please teach me how to teach people to treat me? And I said, that might be a little ambitious to do over breakfast. And said to me, why don't you write a book? So I did. And she's a principal person to whom it's dedicated. She is now deceased. And I know she's delighted the book is out there.
Yeah, no, it certainly is helping a lot more people.
but that's a catalyst.
Wow, and nice.
People will treat you the way you teach them to treat you. Ivna talks a lot in her podcast and in her videos about setting boundaries as being assertive. And what's so important is enforcing the boundaries as well. But I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more.
Yeah, no, for sure. And your book is because it's called "Did You Say Something, Susan?"
May I show it? May I show it?
Show it. Yes, show it. Yes.
Say
absolutely.
How any woman can gain confidence with assertive communication.
Absolutely. It's a must read. Now, who is Susan? Where did Susan come from?
Well, I had no say in the title 20 years prior. The powers that be at the publisher came up with the title, and I started to love it. Susan is a very popular, lovely female name, and Susan is every woman. You're Susan. I'm Susan. Susan is every woman who has ever kicked herself for being too reluctant to speak up in a situation. Susan is every woman who has ever kicked herself for what she should have said. So in a way, so many of us have had the experience of being Susan.
Oh yeah, I think we're all Susans. And why women specifically? Why is it that you focus a lot on women in your book?
Ivna, I'm ashamed to say that at the time it was a marketing decision. The editors and the publishers said that men don't buy self-help books. Women read them, but men need them.
That's so funny.
and they felt that focusing on the female niche would be better for marketing purposes. And being naive as to the publishing world for self-help and for trade. I had written several textbooks prior, which are still used internationally in language institutes all over the world, including Brazil. I was going to defer to their advice on the best approach to take. So that's the reason it's geared towards women. It was a pure marketing decision at the time.
I personally think it does, assertiveness does fit within self-help, but it does also fit within the context of other areas as well, of careers, communication skills. It's just so many different things at once, right? So it depends on the approach that they decided to take at the time,
Sure.
the publishers.
Sure.
And who encouraged your own personal, like when you were a child, were you assertive? And how did you change? Who encouraged you to change?
My dad would not tolerate it if my mother or my brother or myself were not assertive. And the big catalyst was an incident that happened when I was 17 years old. I was not particularly assertive. And I had a job as a showroom model in the New York City Garment Center. And there were a bunch of mannequins in the corner of a room. And one of the showroom managers wanted me to go stand with the other mannequins. So he said to me, go stand over there with the other dummies. Because dummies is a slang term for mannequins. Paulette, go stand over there with the other dummies. So, like a dummy, I went over there and stood with the other mannequins. I was too intimidated to protest the insult. So at dinner that night, the incident was still bothering me, and I mentioned it to my family at the dinner table. And I was expecting innocuous platitudes like, don't let what he said bother you, or just forget about it. But no, my father said to me, oh, really? And what did you respond? And I sort of mumbled, well, Dad, I didn't say anything. And he became irate and he smashed his fist down on the dinner table and said, how dare you allow yourself to be spoken to that way? You are inferior to no one, and don't you ever forget it. Well, a half a century later, I've never forgotten his words. And that was pretty much the catalyst for my realizing the importance of speaking up for yourself. Otherwise, you deny yourself as a person.
Yeah, that's an interesting, because you mentioned that you felt humiliated, which I totally understand in that situation. And so your parents, both of them, were they both assertive?
No, my mom, not so much. My dad was highly assertive. My mother bordered on passive. And when I wrote the book and she read a copy, she had tears in her eyes. And she said to me, I didn't know you wrote this book for me.
Oh, wow.
I'll never forget that. And I said, Mom, I didn't write this book for you. I wrote this book for every woman who has trouble speaking up, needs a little encouragement. And I had no idea that she really felt so intimidated, and speaking up was such an effort for her. But she did it anyway, which brings me to feel the fear and do it anyway, ladies. You might think, I don't know, I'm too timid to ask a question in class, or I don't want to express my opinion at this meeting. You know what? You deny yourself as a person if you don't speak up when you want to. So do it anyway, and then the confidence just starts to come, and it gets easier and easier. I know Ivna has spoken about this as well.
Yeah, and I think if we had millions of people sharing this message, I think it still wouldn't be enough, because a lot of people are going through this in silent.
Yes.
In absolute silence, and they just don't feel comfortable talking about it because they're naturally a bit more kind of passive or quiet and shy about sharing these issues. So absolutely.
And go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and something else, and you deal with this a lot too. Your expertise is incredible. You know, assertiveness is a skill. Introverts can be assertive. I know plenty of extroverts who are not assertive. They're either aggressive, or they get defensive, or they're passive. So assertiveness is not something that is exclusive to extroverts. And introverts can learn assertiveness just as well, because again, it's a skill, like playing the piano, playing tennis, learning to use social media. And it's a skill that gets improved with practice and trial and error, like most skills do.
And how did you learn the skill of assertiveness? I know you've been in the communications field forever, all of your, studying it for a long time. So how did you learn, or where did you? I know you had your experience as with your father, but which triggered the beginning of really realizing that there was something that had to change. But how did you go about actually developing the skill in your life?
Well, I started slowly by speaking up if someone said something untoward to me or inappropriate. And I started to see that I was respected, and that those individuals would never say that to me again, but they'd go next door and they'd say it to someone else. They'd find easier prey. So success breeds success. Had I not experienced early success by saying no to inappropriate requests or letting people know nicely when they were out of line, that might have inhibited it. But because assertiveness usually works, it doesn't always work, because nothing always works. But what it always does is, even if it doesn't get you what you want, and even if it doesn't get a verbal bully, for example, to stop verbally abusing you, it will always leave you feeling better about yourself. And in my view, that's major. But basically, success bred success, and that, as with anything, and that gave me the encouragement to keep on being assertive when appropriate, which is almost always, because, a pet peeve is when people say you're too assertive. Well, as Ivna will tell you over and over and over, and as will I, assertive communication is polite, respectful communication. So what I say to that is, how can you be too polite or too respectful?
I love that. I was actually just about to ask you, because people, especially women, are so concerned about not appearing aggressive or rude. And they feel like if they are present, and if they speak up, then people will see them as somebody who is not cooperative, who is not listening, who is not. So how would you explain to them where the differences between assertiveness and aggressiveness? Like, how do they make sure, how can they feel confident that they are not being aggressive when they do speak up?
Okay, that's a great question, Ivna. You've got to remember something, that just because someone tells you the moon is made of green cheese, it doesn't make it true. So when you start appropriately, what do I mean by that? When you appropriately start to assert yourself and do not allow people to take advantage of you, and you say no to nicely and politely and pleasantly to inappropriate or inconvenient requests, you will be confronted. You will be told, oh, look how aggressive you are, or you're not being cooperative, or you're so selfish. Just because they tell you this doesn't make it so. They want to intimidate you back to being the doormat, to doing their bidding at every possibility. So just because someone says you're aggressive, they're not using the word appropriately. And as long as you have the confidence to know that you were polite and you were respectful, let them say whatever they want to say, because it's going to happen. And you need to be prepared for that. The confrontation of your appropriate assertions.
And so how can women make themselves prepared? Because it's a really hard thing for someone who's been quiet and passive all their lives to actually accept, and who have been running away from conflict and confrontation, to actually accept it and deal with it as it comes.
You know, little by little. You wrote a wonderful article for Forbes magazine, I recall, several months back. I believe it was October or November, right? About
yes.
And you know, several experts recommend role-playing situations, and I'm a big proponent of role-playing. So role play the situation in a safe environment with a friend who takes the part of an aggressor, or someone who confronts you and says, gee, you're so selfish. And how could you respond? One of my favorite responses is, oh, well, you know, you're entitled to your perception, right? I choose to see my behavior differently. Okay, practice that with your friends so that when this occurs, and it will, I promise you, you will get an opportunity to put this into practice. You will feel like you've been in this situation before, visual imagery, role playing, and you'll be able to say, that's an interesting opinion, or you're certainly entitled to your perception. I choose to view my behavior differently. Okay, another example is role play a different situation. Again, you're so selfish, because that's such a common one. Well, you know, I find it really interesting that people call other people selfish when they don't do what you want them to do. Again, practice it until it becomes second nature. Another one is, who here has ever been told by someone who protested an inappropriate remark, you're too sensitive? Raise your hand. You're too sensitive. Well, practice role play with a friend telling you that as aggressively as she or he can, and try responding, interesting. Why is it always the insensitive people who call others too sensitive? Or another one I like is, you're too sensitive. Well, maybe you're not sensitive enough. There's ways to assertively respond that are polite, respectful, and not let the verbal bully rattle your emotional cage, because bullies win when we're upset. So start small, start slow, try it the next time you're faced with one of these situations. You will experience a feeling of exhilaration. You will be so proud of yourself for having made the effort, and that will be the catalyst you need to repeat the behavior on subsequent occasions. What do you think about that, Edna?
You know, I think that's absolutely true. And, you know, I was just observing your own role play here with these hypothetical situations. And I think another thing to note for the audience who's listening to this is the composure and the calm when you say that, when you answer, when you know, to someone who is pointing fingers at you, just by, you know, the way that you say it back, and you even pause for a moment afterwards and let that person kind of let that sink in. I think that itself is already showing that you're completely in control of the situation. And, you know, it's an element of self-respect as well. And the other person will notice that, right? Just from your, from the way you communicate.
And it doesn't matter that you're trembling inside. and that it feels so horrid, okay? Act as if. So many sociologists and psychologists and actors and actresses have advised the same. Don't wait until you feel the confidence in order to assert yourself. Pretend that you have it. Be trembling inside. Feel uncomfortable. Feel the fear, but do it anyway.
Exactly.
Before you know it, it doesn't feel so difficult. And before you know it, it actually feels comfortable. And you will be so proud of yourself, really.
Yeah, the feeling's amazing, you know, independent of what happens afterwards. And even I would say that even when, like you said, if you're trembling inside, but even if you're trembling, you're visibly trembling, even if you are, blushing, even if you are crying, and I know because I've gone through all of those where you're physically trying to communicate and you're a mess. You're a mess, but it still is going to feel amazing at the end.
It is. That's right. Something else, I had some notes on cards on, so why do so many women fail to assert themselves? And another reason, okay, they're afraid of the confrontation, which is unfair and inappropriate. So in an effort not to be called aggressive, or in an effort not to be called selfish, or in an effort not to be called too sensitive, they don't assert themselves. Well, you may as well, because people are going to criticize you no matter what you do. So you may as well be criticized for being appropriately assertive, because again, it's just inaccurate criticism. But another reason is I believe too many women have a well-intentioned but misguided view that they're going to hurt somebody's feelings. They have a confusion over being polite and being assertive. For example, I had a 20-year-old student in one of my college classes. Every semester, I would do an exercise where I would ask the students to role play a situation in which they wished they could have been more assertive, and what they actually said, and what they wish they would have said, and what they would say if they're ever faced with the situation again. So one young lady said that she had accepted her boyfriend's marriage proposal a year prior and called the wedding off about a week before. They had to cancel the venue. They had to notify all the guests. And of course, the other classmates were aghast. And why did you accept the marriage proposal if you knew you didn't want to marry him? And she did know at the time. It's not something that evolved. I didn't want to hurt his feelings.
It's so much worse.
Of course. So being assertive can prevent so much heartache and so much aggravation and acrimony later. I'll give you an example of a mature woman trial attorney, friend of mine by the name of Barbara. I went to her office to pick her up. We were going out to lunch. And one of her colleagues said to her, "Okay, Barbie, have a nice lunch." And she turned around and screamed at him in front of the secretaries and the office staff and the paralegals, "Stop calling me Barbie. I hate it when you call me Barbie." And the poor fellow looked down and mumbled, "I didn't know," and was absolutely mortified. As we left, I said to my friend Barbara, "Is that true?" I had assumed that he would goad her that way, that she had made it clear to him that she preferred to be called Barbara, and that he persisted in doing this just to annoy her. And she finally blew up. That was my assumption. And Barbara said to me, "No, I never told him." I said, "He didn't know you didn't like to be called Barbie?" I said, "How many times has he done this?" "Oh, 30, 40 times. He always calls me Barbie." I finally got sick of it. I said, "Barbara, why didn't you ever tell him?" Guess what the response was, Edna? I didn't want feelings. said you didn't want to hurt his feelings, yet you blow up at him like a banshee in front of the whole office and embarrass the heck out of him. Something's wrong with this picture.
Yes.
So being assertive can prevent a problem within you, aggravation, upsetness, stress from festering, which can lead to physical illness and emotional distress as well. Being assertive right from the start is so, what's the word I'm looking for? Liberating.
Yes.
It's so liberating. And once you experience the feeling of liberation, I did it, I got it over with, and now I can relax.
That is the exact word. That is the word, liberating. And that's what I feel.
You'll never want to be any other way. So to answer your question, I learned that just because that's what happened when I started to be assertive. I started to feel so liberated. I started to feel at ease, and I realized I liked the feeling. I think I need to do more of what gets me to that feeling.
Yeah, I think anybody who is serious about feeling free, I love the word freedom.
Yes, yes.
And when you are not assertive, especially when you tend to be a bit more of a passive or passive aggressive, you are not free. Right? It's just,
no, you're not.
You're not free at all. You are a slave of other people and of all these negative feelings and worries that are not helpful.
Right. And worries, the worry that people won't like you if you speak up for yourself. They won't like you if you say no to an inconvenient or inappropriate request. Well, being liked and being respected are not mutually exclusive. You can be liked and respected. And that's also liberating when you start to realize that as well.
So a lot of women I hear don't believe that. They think that they either, especially in a work environment, that they have to choose between being respected, especially by their male colleagues, versus being liked in men. And then they think that, well, for men it's different because if they are more powerful, they appear more powerful, take more space, then they will be liked and respected. What's your perspective on that?
Well, my perspective is you and I are both on LinkedIn, and there's quite a few influencers, people who run billion-dollar companies, Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, and many others. And they often do videos. So they employ thousands and thousands of people. And they talk about taking the best people with them to the top and what leadership is. And they often make it very clear that they don't want to be surrounded by yes men and women. They do not respect the yes women or the yes men. They want to hear dissenting views. They don't need to hear what they want to hear. They don't need to hear their ideas parroted back to them. They want to hear other ideas, other opinions, even if those views are not in agreement with theirs. And they may not agree with you after all is said and done, but they all say they respect the hell out of the person that has the assertiveness and the gumption to speak up. So think about that.
So basically, if you have to choose,
err on the side of assertiveness.
Of the respect, not the likability. Right. That's going to get you ahead. That's going to make you feel liberated. And right. If you're dealing with somebody, what that also teaches, if you're dealing with somebody who doesn't respect you but wants to like you, but if you act assertively, they dislike you, then maybe that's not somebody that you want to really hang out with. Maybe you need to revisit your circle at work or at or friends, because that's not somebody that you want around you.
Absolutely. And I would have to say, let's get rid of the no criticism, none whatsoever, but let's get rid of that qualifier. Maybe you need to read, not maybe.
That's right. That's right.
I was listening.
Very good.
You need to visit your circle. These are not people who are healthy to surround yourself with. That's the bottom line. They liked you when you were passive. They liked you when you did their bidding. And again, this is not healthy for you. But like Ivna just said, so if you have to choose between speaking up when you want to, remember, not something else I like to say is not everything that triggers you deserves a response. Sometimes the most assertive reaction is none at all, is to be able to turn your back on the individual, not even dignify what they said or what they did with a response. And that's okay too. My point is, though, it's a choice. If you choose not to respond, that's being assertive. If you fail to respond when you really want to, that's not being assertive. That's denying yourself as a person.
Absolutely. It's a choice.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. And I want to ask you another question, which is that I receive every now and then from women, which is, would assertiveness look different for a woman versus a man? Would there be any difference? Do you see any difference in how a woman would behave assertively versus a man because of the social stereotypes that there exist, or the social expectations around gender?
You know, that's an interesting question, and I'll be interested to hear your opinion too. My first reaction is to say there is no difference. Assertiveness is being polite and being respectful. If a male is polite and respectful and assertive, great. And a female is polite and respectful and assertive, great. There should be no difference. Unfortunately, it's people's perceptions. It's a man can say, unfortunately, no, I must decline your request. I've got too much on my plate. Thanks very much for asking. Okay. And the person will respect that. A woman says, no, I must decline your request. I have a lot on my plate. Thanks so much for asking. And she'll get, well, you're not being very cooperative, are you? Or I was really counting on your support. Or why are you so aggressive? Hello. And if I didn't have confidence in myself, I would start to believe that maybe I was being uncooperative, or I was being aggressive. But so there is no difference, but it's the way others like to react to it, which makes us believe there is. What do you think about that, Ivna? I respect your views. I know you're interviewing me. I don't mean to turn this, but I respect you have to say so much.
Yeah, no, I do believe there's a difference. And I wonder if sometimes when a woman who is passive, or who behaves or is known to be passive,
yes,
wants to change to assertive. And I think it's a little bit different when a man wants to change to assertive. So there's obviously they can talk to people and explain that they're changing their behaviors so that people know what to expect when this change happens, and some people are not going to like it.
Right.
I think it works. It's a little bit easier in personal relationships than in professional ones.
I'm sorry. It takes people by surprise when when all of a sudden you start to change. It can take people by surprise and they'll overreact. But guess what? They'll get used to the new you.
They get used to it.
New you. So that's a great point, Ivna. So be prepared for that reaction as well. Not necessarily being confronted in a negative way because they liked you better submissive. They might react with surprise because it's a side of you they haven't seen before. So just be prepared for that. You can't avoid it.
And knowing that if somebody, going back to your previous point, if somebody does react negatively, it doesn't mean they don't like you. Just
That's
because
right.
somebody seemed that they're upset, it doesn't mean they started to dislike you forever and they're never going to want to talk to you again. They don't want to be around you. They're not going to love you. It just means
Right. Okay.
if they're upset, they'll get used to it. But it's like in that moment, they're frustrated, and
That's
just
right.
let them deal with it. It'll pass. Just like you get frustrated and it passes.
Exactly. It will. And if it doesn't, then they're part of the circle that Ivna talked about before, where maybe you want to try to choose a different circle or cull your circle. Be a bit more discriminating about who you keep inside of it. But very often it will pass. They're just taken by surprise and they need some time to process. Like I said, the new improved you.
You improved you. And if there's, and I think that's definitely something that helps as well, is if people do want to learn to be more assertive, and what a great way of doing that is surrounding themselves with more assertive people. So just learn by osmosis a little bit. I want to give you the chance to share anything else that maybe we haven't covered from your book or your activities, or what your offerings with the public and where they can find more about you.
Oh, well, thank you, Ivna. You could just Google me, Paulette Dale, and plenty of stuff will come up. And if you Google Paulette Dale Trump, you will see the videos of me telling the President of the United States he has a great smile and telling him he's handsome in front of 14 million people on national TV. Of course, I have an extensive LinkedIn profile, so please connect with me. My connections know that I will always respond. I'm always honored to be contacted by anyone and to answer your questions. So what I'd like to leave you with is one of my favorite mantras, which has to do with comfort zones. And it's step so far outside of your comfort zone that you have trouble finding your way back.
Love that. Well, never heard of that before.
That's so amazing. With that, do you think of any other questions for me, Ivna?
No, I think you have great stories in your book, and I recommend everyone to check out her book, because it really is not only, it will upskill you, right? If you're looking for that communication skill that's going to get you the respect, her book is definitely going to do that. And it's also just so full of stories that will really show you and illustrate how this can be applied to every facet of your life. So it's really worth.
And my email is in the book. So please email me with any questions or comments. If you would like further clarification on any points I've made, I'm here for you. Always.
By the way, this book is also great for men. It says it's for women. Most of the examples are women, but the techniques also apply for men. So I thank you so much, Paulette. I really, really enjoyed this. And
it was a joy to finally meet you in person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess we can stay in touch more.
I'll look forward to that.
Yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivna.